What is up? My name is Ryan, and thanks for tuning in to Gorasm, the channel where I fill your void on all things horror, weird, and just plain creepy. Today we're talking about Prey. This is something that the whole Predator franchise essentially is something that I've been very excited for, just because I have some sort of, I guess it's nostalgia basically, because, I grew up watching the Predator films. Even, we've had a lot of highs and a lot of lows, mostly lows, but I think that in general, the franchise is, it gives me joy to watch. And so when I saw that this was coming out and I saw the trailer and everything, I was excited because I felt like it was just like a completely different take. Of course, it's a prequel, but on top of that, it's rated R, and that was a really exciting thing because, I think, and I've said this over and over, but as a horror fan, I feel like it is important to have these rated R ratings because a lot of times, especially with these kind of films, I think that rated R and Predator kind of lends itself to each other, and I think it's important because it gives them more freedom to kind of go there with what they're trying to achieve. And also, Dan Trachtenberg was directing this, and he did 10 Cloverfield Lane. I was a really, really big fan of that, and I think a lot of people were. So, in general, all these factors combined led me to being here today, and we were going to talk about it. So, let's just get into it. So the story is essentially the tale as old as time, where a female protagonist is trying to win the respect of the world, basically, which is, in her case, her tribe. And Naru is trying to do all these things to prove that she can be a warrior, and she doesn't want to be what they want her to be, which is a homemaker and whatever else society has placed on gender roles and things like that. Because keep in mind, this film does take place in the 1700s, which it could have fooled me, honestly, but we'll get into that in a minute. But essentially, it's a very simple story, and she's kind of trying to prove herself all while she's being hunted, and she's also hunting, and that's basically it. All right, so starting with my positives. Me being an openly out feminist, I really enjoyed watching Amber Midthunder as the lead of the film. I thought she did really, really great. She brought a lot to kind of the journey of what was happening in the film, because honestly, it basically was her alone. There wasn't a ton of dialogue in the film also, so it was cool to see all the stuff that she had to go through to get to where she was by the end of the film. And to go along with that, I thought it was a really creative and cool way to incorporate Prey into the whole Predator franchise. Like, most of the time we get prequels and they take place a year or two or whatever before the initial film, but this one took place in the 1700s, so it's way, way, way before the 80s Arnold Schwarzenegger amazing version of Predator. But I thought it was a really smart way to incorporate this whole thing and to kind of give the audience something new without having to recycle things and storylines from the past films. So I really, really did enjoy that. So considering this is a rated R film, I think that definitely helped with a lot of the action sequences. Though we don't get a ton of them until kind of the last half of the film, when we do get them, they were executed perfectly. I think that the way that they handled all the fight sequences was really smart, and the way that he attacks his victims, and just like the technology, I guess, that he uses. We usually get a ton of like crazy technology with the Predator, but I don't really feel like we got a ton of that in this. I think that was probably for the best because it was very simple in the sense that the stuff that he was using, I keep going like this because he's always doing that, but the stuff that he's using is smart, and it's like nothing is like, oh, okay, that was like ridiculous, but it was really cool. I thought that the way that they handled it was perfect, and I think that the even the hand-to-hand combat was done really well, and it was executed perfectly. And also on top of that, just like the gore, it wasn't gory actually, it was more brutal, I will say, because there were a few times where I was like, dang, but then it was like also really cool at the same time. So the Predator design, I think, is super important, obviously, because he's changed like a little bit throughout the whole like franchise, but I don't think it's ever straight off too much. But I will say that I think that this version of him is probably one of the best. It was super toned down in a sense. It wasn't as like flashy as the most recent Predator films, but I think that probably was because this takes place so long ago. So I'm not really sure. There's not a ton of, like I said before, technology and things like that. But I think that it was smart that the way they did it with his mask, and once he took off the mask, it was really cool to see. They were good with the visual effects with the Predator, and I think that what they did with him was really cool, and it just made me excited to kind of see more. To go along with that, we don't see a ton of him in the first half of the film because he does the whole like invisible thing for such a long period. I think maybe too long, but besides that, once we do actually see him, I think it was really awesome. All right, for my negatives, I'm gonna start off by saying I think that some of the things I enjoyed about the film was how it brought kind of it toned it down a little bit in the sense that the past few we've gotten so much stuff and so much storyline and so much visual effects. I think this one just toned it down so much that it made it too simplistic, I think. And though I appreciated the simplicity of the location and what was happening in the storyline, I just think sometimes it was a little bit too simplistic because the story kind of has been done before. It was not enough going on. So I think that's the only thing to go along with that. I just would have, since the location and where they were, it would have been cool to kind of see a little bit more about the tribe and everything like that because they were there and there wasn't enough going on to kind of distract from that. So there were a few times where I was like, oh, I guess I could have enjoyed getting to know the tribe a little bit better or even other characters because essentially it's really just her. And like I said before, there's not even a ton of dialogue. So it just would have been cool to see a little bit more, I think. So for the second one, I know this has probably come up a ton. And so originally when I did the trailer reaction and I read some articles about Prey, they initially said, and I don't remember when they said this was going to happen, but they said they were going to release a version of this film in the Comanche Tongue. And so they were going to release it that way. And so I was intending on watching it in that with subtitles because I thought that I would have enjoyed watching the film that way because I think that's the way that made it feel a little bit more authentic. But when I watched the film, it wasn't available and I didn't see that option. So I don't know if that's happening. So to go along with that, everything is done in English. And I think that, like I said before, the film takes place in the 1700s and it just felt like it was too much good English was spoken in this film. I would have enjoyed more of like, even more broken English would have made it seem a little bit more real, but they almost seemed like they were about to be like, I don't know, just like say all these like catchphrases and things like that we say now. It didn't feel like it was in the 1700s. So I had a hard time. It probably took me about 45 minutes, maybe like 40 minutes to kind of like accept the fact that the English was so good. And that's only because initially they had said they were going to release it this specific way. So I think maybe if I hadn't heard anything about that, it wouldn't have bothered me as much. But I guess I was intending on watching it this specific way. And when I wasn't able to, I was a little bit like, that kind of sucks. And also, I just think it brings more attention to, Native American heritage. And I think it would have been cool just to kind of see that. So that was a little bit of something that kind of bummed me out. So by now, I just feel like the Predator franchise and us as a fan base kind of deserve a little bit more as far as story is concerned. I just feel like all this time has gone on and we don't really know much about the Predator. Like, honestly, we know what he can do and we know what he looks like. And we obviously know he's like an alien and all these things, but we don't know anything about like where exactly he came from or like how they were created or anything like that. And I think this was a perfect film to kind of show that because it takes place so long ago. So it's like, when would we find that out then? In the 1500s, the 1400s? Like, who knows? And so I think this film would have been the perfect opportunity only because the story is so simple. There was so much time they could have gave us a little bit more story, but they didn't. And so that was something that kind of, it was a little bit just disappointing, I guess. I just would have liked to see a little bit more. All right, so my overall thoughts about the film, I thought it was a really enjoyable experience watching it. Like, I had fun, though I thought that the film was a little bit slow at times, and I would have loved a little bit more backstory. But it was essentially a story of survival between two characters who just want to and need to survive, essentially, because their life depends on it. And it was a cool story, and I really appreciated like the creativity behind it, and I loved, a lot of the shots they used. I know a big complaint lately that I've seen is the CGI. And honestly, I wasn't bothered by it. I think there were times where obviously I knew that it was CGI, but I can go into a film pretty like accepting, and granted, I would have loved if they used like a real bear and all these things, but I also know that budget permitted, they just aren't able to. And so I did notice it, but it wasn't something that bothered me. So I think that it was like a really fun experience. I don't know necessarily that I would watch it again, though if they do release the film in the Comanche language, I think that I would watch it with subtitles because I think I'm interested in kind of seeing maybe if it changes my mind about how the film kind of comes off. I don't know. Overall, it was fun. It was a good film, and I think that it is worth watching. I get why it was released on streaming because I feel like maybe it wasn't strong enough for a theater release, but ultimately it was really cool, and I always appreciate and love seeing characters from so long ago come back and kind of seeing what the modern culture will do with them. So I love that. And Predator is always going to be something that's nostalgic to me personally, and I think that in general for a lot of people they can say that too. So I will say that I think you should see the film, and I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 on the Gorism scale. I know that it's not a perfect film, but I think you should see it, especially if you are a fan of the franchise. I think if you're not necessarily a fan of the franchise, I think you might not love this film and you might think it's not that great. But I think for us, people that have loved watching Predator in the past, I think that you will find enjoyment out of this, and it's something that you should definitely see. Thanks again for joining me here, Gorism, the channel where I talk about everything horror related. My name is Ryan again. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you kind of like in the middle where I am? I mean, I feel like I can't be the only one that enjoyed this film, but also at the same time has many questions. I don't know. Can you see the story continuing on? And do we need a sequel for this? Like, I really don't. It hasn't sat with me long enough, and I'm not sure if this story should continue. I don't know. What do you think? Again, if you can like, subscribe, and tune in because I have a lot of really cool horror videos coming up that I'm excited to share. So I would love to stay connected and just talk about everything horror related. Again, my name is Ryan, and we will talk soon.